Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for a purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. For uses of use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, education, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. Now let's start this dang show.
You don't have any fights this week? Oh man, we gotta have some fights.
I want to make a toast if he's going to make a toast, and I'll wait for as long as it takes for everyone to listen to what I have to say. I want to make a toast to Al Davis, the owner of the Raiders, whose long living motto of commitment to excellence has always been something that I have wondered if I could ever achieve. Have a great rest of the day.
What up? What up? What up?
Got me doing too many last minute things. My bad.
I know we're not used to starting on time, so we're like, wait, what are we doing? All right, okay. Anyway, we're back. It is Wednesday. We are, 4th of July is coming up this Friday, but when it comes, that's for the regular, nation. But for Raider Nation, 4th of July is Al Davis's birthday, and I believe he's going to be 90. He would have been 96, I think. I got to look it up. I should have looked it up.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up.
But anyways, right here, welcome to the Cage Match Special Edition. We're going to talk about Al Davis, and we have one of our favorite special guests, Jon Kingdon. Jon Kingdon, we had before, and my mic. Okay. We had before what we had last year with Al Davis's birthday. We had Jon Kingdon, and before we came onto the show, he said, "Oh, I got some more stories." I said, "Hey, well, you know what? This is the perfect time, and we bring Jon Kingdon in." But before we do all that, Asylum, let's do it real quick. Let's do our shameless plug. That's what it's called, right? Our shameless plug. Here we go, Asylum. Take over right here.
All right, everybody, go to the YouTube channel, The Cage Match Show. Like, share, subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and hit that bell. That way you know anytime a new video, short, or meme gets dropped, and you'll be able to watch it right away. If Roger Goodell is trying to be sneaky thing that he can be and trying to shut down the show, you can always catch us on Facebook at Oakland Raiders Savage, or my page, Asylum, and we'll let you know when it's okay to come back onto the YouTube channel. And after the show, why don't you go ahead and go mosey on to WGG, browse their wide variety of different products, or just order that sampler, the sampler box that you see right there. Get yourself a little shaker, sample little flavors. Then when you're going to check out, put Cage Match, one word, in the discount code to get 10% off your entire order.
And like we always say, when you think of wins, you think of dubs. When you think of dubs, think of Dubby. Get that energy like Max Crosby, Pete Carroll, and the new energized Raider Nation that's ready for this season to come up, because we're going to take over the West, baby. Yeah. Go there, 10% off your order. Cage Match, one word, CAGEMATCH in there. Help us out, w.gg. And also shouts out to Fabian, the Copa Fabian. Go to his website, www.rn4lifer.com. That is RaiderNationForLifer.com, so you can remember it easily. Go there, check it out. He helped us out with our koozies and our lanyards. So, and we sent one out to Vincent. He should have it by now. Maybe later he'll let us know in the show on his break. But go to there. And also, Raiderman19 said his website is up, and it is Raiderman19.com. So it will be the same website. The Raiderman from Richard podcast is ready to go. He is starting production on that. Go to that website, because you can also get the Raider Oath merch, the Raider Oath, which is what you hear at the end of our intro. And speaking of that oath, we want to somehow, some way get him to the torch to open up the 2025 season with 65,000 Raider fans that Pete Carroll promised us, because he's going to turn this whole thing around. And we want to have him in a torch, light that torch up with those back windows open to the whole Las Vegas Strip. That Oakland Mystique with the Las Vegas Raider way coming together. The mega powers combined. Oh, yeah. And he comes out and tells everybody, I am a Raider fan. One more time, Asylum. I
am a Raiders fan.
All right. Now, let's... Oh, and then real quick, we got to make sure our important dates, coming up. The July 17th would be the rookies going into training camp. It will not be at Napa like they wanted it to be. It will be in Henderson. Then the veterans come in on the 22nd of July. And then, of course, football starts again, even though it's preseason. But the Hall of Fame game, July 31st, Los Angeles Chargers versus the Detroit Lions. And, of course, on the 2nd of August, that is when Eric Allen gets inducted into the Hall of Fame. Finished out his career with the Raiders. So that's a very important date right there. And then our season starts, our preseason games. And then high chance I'll be at Seattle for that game. Not confirmed, but high chance. So anyways, Pete Carroll's first day, we're going to take documentation. We're going to do it. We're going to document that whole thing. All right. Anyways, Asylum, we have a very important guest that we got to bring on. He is author of this book, Al Davis, Behind the Raider Shield. Make sure you get that on Amazon, and we have that right here. Make sure you get that on Amazon. So without further ado,
there's a link right there that should take you straight to it.
It's right inside the comments section. So go in there, click on it, get yourself a copy. I read this book a while back, and I couldn't put it down because there's some stories of behind the scenes, or like it says, behind the shield.
I have the hard copy that you saw. I even have the audio book, and I'm constantly listening to the audio book. It's in my constant rotation of books that I'm always listening to. So if you don't buy it, the hard copy, go to Audible or wherever else you can download books, get an audio book, and definitely get it, because even the narrator does a hell of a job with the book. It's a must read or must listen.
All right. Without further ado, let's bring in the man, Jon Kingdon. But first, we got to do the intro. So here we go.
When you have great coaches, then after you have great coaches, you get great players. You have a great organization, and you tell them one thing: just win, baby.
Hey, it worked. What is up, Jon Kingdon? How are you doing today?
We're doing great. I've been looking forward to this each year around the July 4th time. I very much again look forward to you guys getting in touch with me, and I appreciate it and look forward to it every year.
Yes, we appreciate you coming on and kind of giving us the stories of the golden years of the Oakland Raiders, Oakland Los Angeles Raiders. And just, I mean, it's always an honor for you to come on. I know we had you also come on for one of our draft shows to give us a behind the scenes and how the draft goes when it was the War Room with Al Davis. So we always appreciate your stories and your knowledge of everything that happened in behind the scenes. And also, if you want to know, get this book. It's right here in the camera. Get this book. It's right there on the bottom. The name of the book, Behind the Raider Shield. So get this book. Asylum had put the link in the comments, so go there, check it out. It's a great book. Once you start reading it, you're not putting it down until the book is over. That's how it is. That's how I was. I was driving and reading at the same time. That's how much I couldn't put it down. All right.
Read responsibly, guys. Don't drive and read.
Just one quick point here. I was a co-author. Bruce Kebrick, who I worked with for a number of years, and he had stories that I wasn't familiar with, and vice versa. And then Steve Corcoran, who had covered the team for the East Bay Times and Oakland Tribune. So it was co-author, but I'm always more than happy to be at the forefront of the interviews.
One of these days, we got to get both of you guys on here to talk about it. That would be an interesting show.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'll contact them and see if we can make it a three-way. Sure.
That'd be awesome.
Give me a heads up. I'm sure they'd love to come on and just to show more than just I got my ring here, the old Super Bowl ring, and we had this great doctor, Dr. Bob Albo, who is just a wonderful magician and taught me that disappearing trick. So the more you can do, I guess.
To have one of those rings. Oh my
God. And I wanted to ask first, because I know, I don't know if they're trying to come out with I guess they started production with the Madden movie. I don't know if you've heard the synopsis of it, but I wanted to know if you can clarify the real story, because you came in towards the end of Madden's tenure. The synopsis, and I should have had the graphic, but the synopsis, they said that it said that Al Davis had tried to push John Madden to retirement. And I knew that was false, because John Madden decided to retire. Al Davis didn't want him to retire. Do you have do you have any back or story behind the scenes of when John Madden retired?
Well, his last year was my first year, and that was a tough year for him. I didn't really get to know him very well. We were in different buildings and such, but you had his ulcers. He didn't like flying. It was a tough season, and I wasn't. But he just didn't seem like a very happy guy with all of that going on. And I just it's funny you mentioned that, because Al was going into the press conference that morning with Al. I just happened to be with him. Says, "What kind of questions do you think they're going to ask me?" So I was caught me off guard a little bit, but I was thinking, well, they might ask you, might ask John if he felt that you were pushing him out. And you think they'd really ask that? I said, he was like, well, it's just it's something you might have him be aware of and such. So, but no, I do not know that John would have felt pushed out. What little I could tell is he kind of hit the end of the road, it seemed, and was very happy to hit that 100 wins in 10 seasons. So I don't know if there was anything particularly that Al, Al put pressure on everybody, but I think John put a lot of pressure on himself, and that last year was a tough one.
Yeah, going against all those coaches in the NFL at the time, like Chuck Noll and
Don Shula,
Don Shula from Miami, and like the golden ages of head coaches. And John Madden, I believe, had a better record out of all of them. It was just getting into the playoff. Once he was in the playoffs and all these crazy games like the Immaculate Reception and then the frozen sidelines the year after, and just these little heartbreaks that the Raiders were going through. The Lytle fumble after the game, after the double overtime versus the Colts, the goes to the post. John Madden, kind of like how the Raiders have been, always have something with the referees and everything. I don't know if we covered this last time, but do you believe there was a conspiracy with the referees and Al Davis? And do you still believe that there is some kind of negative? How would you ask this question, Asylum? Anything
is there still? I mean, is there still a bounty out against the Raiders when it comes to the refs? Being,
no, I really wouldn't. But I mean, it seemed obviously it was like that. At worst, maybe I could say that I don't think they were upset then when particular rules went against us in that sense. I mean, I go the Tuck game. I still can't bring myself to watch it. Is just a remarkable kind of thing. And the other one I've always heard about was we had a trade set up to get John Elway. In that first round, we had a whole pick set up, trade with Baltimore, and from everything I've heard with our people that were involved, I certainly wasn't there, but that Rozelle got involved, and it wasn't a very good trade. I think, from what I understand, we were offering far more than they did. They had a first round pick. Chris Hinton was a very good player, and then I think they threw in Mark Herman, who was just a journeyman guy. And so it's the one thing I'm pretty certain that transpired was Rozelle getting involved in that, and it would have been interesting to see Elway with us for however many years he would have.
The story I know about that was he said any other team but the Raiders.
Yeah, that's how I've
heard. That's out there about that.
Yeah,
for the Elway trade, and we were supposed to give up Tatum and.
No, I don't know. It was it was picks, and I think Teddy Watts was in one of them, but then they were pushing for Lester and Howie, and so I'm not sure the exact, but that would have been a little excessive too.
Yeah, because I remember that the Raiders were in talks, and that would have been interesting. If John Elway was the quarterback for the Raiders, do you think that if Elway was quarterback for the Raiders, do you think the Mike Shanahan relationship would have been would have worked out better if John Elway was a Raider when Al Davis promoted Mike Shanahan or brought in Mike Shanahan to take over for Tom Flores?
Hey, Elway would have made anybody look better. Who knows? Maybe. Al was a little concerned that Mike didn't maybe throw the ball downfield as much. So, if he had had a system where he wasn't, well, he worked with John, of course. It was great. It would have been a great thing with him, with us, as it was with Mike and John in Denver.
Asylum, you got?
No, keep going. I'm just listening. I'm ready for the new stories. What I'm here for. I'm just excited as everybody else. I want to hear some of these new stories. We're here to talk about Al, right?
I always remember, like July 4th. To be honest, the big joke was that was really the one day of the year that everybody got off, and really nobody would go in that one day. That was the one day. So. And we always, the joke was this, we're celebrating Al's birthday and such, but it was always a kind of a day that obviously it was easy to remember.
Yeah.
But, I promise you a story that wasn't in the book that I kind of, and stuff that I said, oh, I should have put this one in. There was an issue of Rolling Stone magazine, and it was way back, and normally I didn't get it, but I saw on the cover, most influential people in the NFL. So I picked it up, and Al was number 2 behind Tex Schramm of the Cowboys. And, they had a little bit, and they put under Al has the instincts of Darth Vader. So So I brought it to him, and it's interesting. So he said to me, looked at it, and he wasn't. I thought he might have been disappointed. He was number one, but Tex and the Cowboys were, it was neck and neck with the influence that these teams had. So he looked at me and said, "Who's Darth Vader?" I said, "Well, he's the character that he epitomized evil in the Star Wars movies." And he thought for a second, and he looked at me, and I'm waiting for a reaction. He says, "Well, that's pretty good, huh?"
That is so Al Davis right there. Wait, I could picture that.
Well, he liked the line, "I'd rather be feared than respected." And if you see, we self-published, and we called our self-publishing name, which of course we only published one book, was "Rather Be Feared Than Respected." So if you, I don't know if you ever saw that in the book, but that's the name of the publishers, which was us.
No, actually, I have not. I'm gonna have to look at that after the show. Find that. We wanted to do one. It was related because Al Davis was forever known about the overhead projector. When we were coming with one of our things, we were thinking about trying to use something with an overhead projector for ours, but
I didn't even go downstairs, and I stayed in my room, watched it on TV. That was screwy times.
Yeah,
the whole fiasco with bringing in Lane and the way it happened, and we wanted Steve Sarkisian, and it just was crazy. And Lane was a good coach. It just wasn't the pro level wasn't for him, but he was a good personnel guy because in college they do a lot of evaluation and the whole Jamarcus Russell thing. Our big issue. Look, he was very talented. I mean, he could do anything, but he just didn't have a lot of pride in what it was. And as soon as he got his check, you could see he just didn't work very hard at it. And Lane, fought very hard. We wanted to get Calvin Johnson, and Al wasn't going to back down. And you hoped he could develop. And I've always talked that the two most we had in the Raiders' history, two of the most talented quarterbacks in the history of football, and that was Jeff George and Jamarcus. In fact, it happened on YouTube. They show these old Raider games, and I was watching, and Jeff George just was beautiful the way he threw. He just didn't have that something that je ne sais quoi that Kenny Stabler had, that Rich Gannon had, that kind of thing. He didn't have it. But as I said, they were the two most talented quarterbacks, but also the two of the most underachieving quarterbacks. Now Jeff was not as bad. I mean, Jamarcus just was a disaster. You couldn't reach him. And in fact, there was one guy that there was only one coach in this league that could have made him a player, and that was Terry Rubisky, who was as tough a guy as there was. And Terry was a guy that the players loved, but they also saw him as the toughest guy that was out there. And I kept pushing for Al to hire him, and something went on I won't get into, and Al got very stubborn about it, and to his discredit. And the line was, he had Irish Alzheimer's. He forgot everything but a grudge. So one time, Al called me, and we were sort of between Cable was the interim, and it wasn't clear what was going to go on. And Al called me up and said, and he knew, and I was very close with Terry. Terry was my best friend in football. I'm still very, very close with him. He's in my wedding. I'm godfather of one of his sons. I mean, just a truly magnificent person. Anyway, he called me and he said, does Terry still have the fire? I said, Al, he's a conflagration. I mean, and I thought the question was, if I make him the head coach, I mean, is he going to be the guy? So that's why I was talking. He says, all right. Well, they give us permission. I said, well, how can they turn you down? So I called Terry up. I said, Terry, he's going to call you, gonna bring you in to interview for the head job. He says, all right, I'm waiting for it. So he called me back in like 20 minutes, and he says he wanted me to come in and be the coordinator. I said, come on. He said, well, the coach called him in, the head coach in Atlanta, Smith was his name. And he said, Terry, look, I really like our staff. I want to keep everyone together. I've been turning down other people for positions like coordinator and whatever. I'd really like you to stay, but I know you have history back there. And if you want to go back, I won't stand in your way. And he says, no, I'm happy to be here. Anyway, I think Terry got a raise out of it, which was good. And Terry called me about it. I said, this is ridiculous. I mean, first of all, the reason you're bringing him, we want you to come in is, you could handle Jamarcus, and but as a coordinator, if it works, the head guy is going to get the credit. If it doesn't work, you're going to get the blame, and all that. So anyway, Al called me that night, and he said, I was going to have a surprise for you. I said, really? What was that? Because he knew. Well, I called Atlanta, to get permission to interview and to be the coordinator, and they turned us down. So I said, well, coordinator? I said, asked to interview and to be the head coach. They can't turn you down. He explodes, which is, and he hangs up. So the next, I think the next day he felt, he didn't often felt, but he felt bad about it. So he goes, calls me up and said, you and I, we really weren't on the same page on this one, were we? I said, Mr. Davis, we weren't even in the same book. Normally not. He said, all right, I'll see you anyway. But, that really would have been the way to go. And unfortunate. I don't know if anyone, I explained where that picture came from, which was kind of funny. Out of the corner of my eye, I see somebody taking our picture. And it was a young guy. I think it was a college kid. And after I got away from Al, I went over to him and I said, were you taking the picture of me and Mr. Davis? And he goes, oh my God, is that okay? Is it okay? I said, yeah. Could I get a copy of it? He said, sure. So in fact, that picture was in the Santa Barbara Times of all things, but he sent me the photo and that's the picture. And we were going to put it in the book. And so we wanted to give the guy the credit. And this was, he was probably 25, 26 when that picture was taken. So now it's like 35 years later or so. And he's probably 60. So we're trying to track him down. And he got into the Sporting Photographers Hall of Fame and such. And then the next article we see he had died. And so we tracked his widow down. She was living in Golden, Colorado. And it was Corcoran who tracked her down and, said to her, explain what we wanted to do. And we like to put the picture and give him credit. We need permission. And she was very, very touched about it. So that was kind of a nice story on that photo. So I've always enjoyed it. And I've got it. I've got the original, in a frame up here at home, but it's nice that you put it up there. So that was great.
Yeah. I one of the episodes we had you on, I had it colored. So I think Assam, did you send him the colored version of that picture? I think
I'd have to look back. If you sent it to me, then I moved it forward, but I don't remember if you sent it to me or not in order to do that.
Okay, well,
I'll find it and we could do that.
I can send it in.
We could bring up a little bit. I'm not sure how much you know Pete Carroll and everything and going, but everyone's happy about Pete Carroll coming on and everything. Do you think Al Davis could have? Well, I'm not even going to say would have hired. We're just going to assume it happens. But if Pete Carroll and an Al Davis would have worked, maybe like the Madden. I know Madden was young and going, when all that happened, but that was like a marriage that ended up working. Do you think this, with Pete Carroll, it would be a typical Al Davis head coach situation, or would that have been one of those ones that might have been able to, at the time, if Al Davis was still alive, obviously, that could work out and maybe bring back the glory days, if you want to say?
Well, we had a bad run. Obviously Madden worked out great and Tom Flores worked out great, and we brought in Mike, and that could have worked out. But Al, Mike was doing things his way, and Al didn't adjust. And then Art came in. We had some initial success, and then after Art, Mike White wasn't very good, and Norv came in, and not Norv, excuse me. It was Joe Bugle. Bugle down there.
No, Joe Bugle was right before John Gruden.
And then and then John
was-
came in, absolutely, and it was we had like a really four not very good years of running through there, and again I talked about Al called me up after that last game, and he said, "What do you think?" And I just you got to be careful. I said, "Do you really want to know what I think?" He says, "Yeah, I do." I said, "Okay." I said, "This is an embarrassment." I said, "Going into that last home game, I had to work to get out of the car. It was the first time I was going to watch a game where I knew we were going to lose. I mean, I know we've had teams that weren't there, but I always felt there was a way we could win. And it's just not worth the effort to put it." And he says, "I agree with you. I swear I'm going to turn this thing around." And we brought and Gruden came in. In fact, he came between Gruden and Belichick. Now, he wasn't going to hire Belichick. And I tell you, I talked about it when after John had retired, told the story. I was just there. It was my first year there. I'm kind of interning. And he called me into his office and he said, "Do you know George Allen?" I go, "Well, not personally, but I know who he is." Well, we had the Stingley incident, the Darryl Stingley, where he got paralyzed. And he said, "Take my car, pick him up at the airport, take him down to the hospital. He wants to go see the guy." So that was fine. I took him down. Couldn't have been nicer. And he met with her. And I'm sitting there with his mother, with Stingley's mother. It was just the sweetest woman. And it just, you tear up with her talking about it. Anyway, so then George Allen comes back. I'm going to take him back to the airport. And I'm dropping him off. He says, "Come on, let me buy you some ice cream." He's a big ice cream guy. So back then, everybody knew Al's car was a big black Lincoln. I could park it out front and nobody bothered it. So we're sitting there and he starts selling himself to me. "Well, I studied Denver and, the way I would defend them and the Broncos and the Chargers and, and the Chiefs. I really think." I'm thinking, well, this is very nice. He's selling himself to me. Like I got some input. And then he goes, "I'd like to, would you call Al on the phone? I'd like to thank him." And he, "Oh, thanks so much. This guy was a young man. Al, when I ever played against the Chiefs," he went on like that. Because so he leaves. So now, a few months now, then Madden has retired. So I happen to be driving Al. He says, "Guess who wants to be my head coach?" I go, "George Allen?" He says, "How did you know that?" And I told him the story. I said, "This guy wants to keep coaching." That's interesting. So actually, and so it was Tom. So obviously it was Tom. And it was actually between Tom and Ray Perkins, who had been with the Chargers. And Al liked him a lot. So here's a story I never talked about. So Al is interviewing Ray Perkins. And I'm there at the building. And I'm not in the interviews. But I got to take Ray he's got like a 9 p.m. flight. Something like that. So it's like 8 o'clock. And then I said, if we're going to catch the flight, we need to leave now. And then it was like 8:25. I think, well, if we're going to catch the flight, we need to leave now. Now it's 8:45. Now, back then they didn't have security. You just walk. I said, if we really want to do it, we got to leave now. All right, we'll be right out. Well, now it's 9:10. And he goes, "Oh, you ready to go now?" I said, "Well, the flight left already." And Al said, "How could you not already see?" So, I was talking to someone also who knew the deal. He says, he didn't want him to leave and make the flight. He wanted to keep him overnight. So he was putting on a show. So that was pretty funny. And we eventually did. We brought in Ray, and he was the coordinator. And the funny story is when John got hired, Ray was still on the staff, and he was the first guy that Gruden fired. And I found the reason was when Ray, I think was the head coach, I think it was in Tampa, whatever. John's dad was an assistant coach, and Ray fired him. So the first thing that John did was to fire Perkins. So there's a lot of
no family revenge there.
Yeah, a little nepotism in reverse or somehow, but that was pretty good. And then, something else that they kind of changed. This is a story that I wish I'd kind of put in the book talk about how things changed in the league, and for Al in the way the players became. So when when I got there, the players loved Al. They played. They loved for the game. They're making, not super money, but money that's, very good. But they, the Hendricks and the Stablers and I mean, go on and on. In fact, I don't know. Can you see this? Is this? That's my photo on my phone. That's me and Teddy Hendricks. That was the weekend after Al died. So they gave us, they gave us those shirts. If you wear the shirt to the game, you can keep it. So that's an Al. Anyway, so but those guys were great. But I always, again, when Chester came in, that just showed there was a different type of personality on a lot of the players. And what I mean by that, Chester came in, and when when coming out, he was amazingly talented when he wanted to be. And he was just a dominating guy. And I used to send questionnaires to opposing coaches. And I remember the guy from NC State, said, this guy is as talented as anyone is, but if you have any pride in your organization, you won't take this guy. So, we looked at the film. We had Earl Leggett, and we had really a veteran team. And Chester came in, and he was great. But, Howie took him under his wing. I think he was living at Howie's house. Earl Leggett was an amazing coach, and he played really hard. It was great. And then when Earl left and then Howie retired, Chester was in his own world. And when he wanted to play, he was great. But, he'd come out onto the field, and he's wearing an overcoat, and he's in his own world. He wasn't evil, but, he just did things the way he wanted to do it, and you can't win with guys like that. Now, the example, there was a game, and I may have talked about this. We're playing the Chicago Bears, and I still remember, and they've got like 3rd and 2 at the goal line, 3rd and goal at the 2-yard line. And there's maybe like 1 minute and 30 seconds to go in the game. And I said, we're up by like 2 points. And it's 3rd down, and Neil Anderson runs into the line of scrimmage, and it's packed up, and they can't get. And he breaks it to the outside, and there's no one out there. I mean, oh my God. Chester takes off, and he horse collars him, which was legal then. And it was unbelievable. I mean, it was just, a 325-pound guy. Right? It just is a remarkable play. So I'm down there, and I was just happened to be outside the locker room, and Al walks by, and he's staying. Chester wasn't in. I said he's out there doing interviews. So he comes in. And he looks at Chester, comes by, and says, "Hey, you, come here." And Chester goes, "Yeah." He says, "Chester," he says, "young man, that play at the goal." Oh, I'm sorry. So let me finish. So it's 4th down. We're up by 2. And Bob Thomas was the kicker. It's like an extra point. And he shanks it. So we win the game because of that play. That was the whole point. We won the game that we shouldn't have because of this play. So he calls Chester over and says, "Young man, that play at the goal line, one of the greatest plays I've seen in all my years of football." Now, I mean, you talk about a compliment from Al Davis. I said, "That's amazing." And Chester goes, "Okay." And he walks in the locker room. And he was shook a little bit. Hey, this is a whole new generation. And again, the way I talk about, we had the 2 most talented quarterbacks, et cetera. We had the two of the most talented defensive tackles in the history of football was Chester. And can you guess it? Because he's an underachiever. Darrell Russell. I mean, when he played, he was great. But he kept had some drug issues, and they're like 4 times he should have been suspended, and we kind of kept somehow got away with it, and finally he got suspended. But was just when he played, he was great. And the 2 of them, in fact, when we drafted Darrell, Chester goes, "I'm going to take him under my wing." No, Chester. It's okay. And, and then, he had a tragic, they both of them, it was crazy. They both died at young ages. Here's the story about Chester. He's at the University of Tennessee, and Bruce Kebrick's there scouting. And this guy comes in, and he doesn't recognize him at first, and he's talking, like he knows him. He's calling him Bruce, and then another coach came. The guy's like, "Oh, it was great." And then the guy comes in. "Well, who was it?" "That was Chester. He was like down to 230. I mean, he looked great." and it's not so much that the guy's a coach. I mean, so, so anyway, now I'm at Stanford, and now Chester's coaching at Stanford. And I was talking to David Shaw, was the head coach, who David coached us. And I said, well, geez, how's Chester doing? He's doing great. He really is. He was the assistant D-line coach. He says, look, I'd make him the D-line coach, but, we brought him in, and this guy is a great coach. I don't want to get rid of him. But if I had to hire a full-time D-line coach, I'd hire him. So I see Chester, and I said, Chester, boy, I hear you're doing great. David talks about you. I heard you did great. And he's like, really. But let me ask you, do you think it's kind of ironic that you're a coach, with how difficult you made it for your coaches? He said, you're right. Absolutely. It's just, but I'm really enjoying it. And then, I don't know, it was a few months later, he just didn't wake up. Just whatever the problem was. That was really a shame that happened, because he was really moving on. And then Darryl had some crazy thing. He was driving.
Yeah.
And there was a guy from De La Salle High School who had played at USC. And I remember scouting the guy, and I can't remember his name right off the bat, but he must have, I think he played like Freddie Belentnikoff, and he was 27, which was Freddie's number. And he played like that, but he didn't have enough speed. But they're driving, and I don't know if they're being chased by the police, or they hit a curb and they spun, they both died. So, it's just, just a shame. But
I remember that article, Darryl Russell, it was like in the middle of the night, and he like ran off the curb, hit like a fire hydrant, and then slammed it to a tree or something. And I'm all like, that was crazy. Yeah. How like, yeah. I don't know if it ever came out on like what happened, if it was under the influence or if it was just they were speeding and lost control. I don't remember if there was a follow-up article on what happened, but it was sad when I read that, because he had just retired from football. He had just retired like a year or so, finished playing in the NFL. I think he finished with the Redskins and then like one season maybe, and then he retired. And then next thing you heard was soon after he got into that fatal accident, which was sad.
No, it was just it is sad, and but that's life. Everybody doesn't have that the Howie Long attitude, or people like Sean Jones was a guy that loved to play. He was great. Enjoyed him a lot, and we actually brought him in pro personnel. I liked talking with him. He was always a lot of fun, and here's just something that's a little. I'm not really a braggadocious guy, but I don't know if you can see. This is a picture that I said, and you can't read it on the bottom. There it is, Jon Kingdon. Can you sort of read the bottom?
Student athlete and former director of scouting for Oakland Raiders.
I went to Oberlin College, which is a very school in Ohio, and I played football there. And they have a Hall of Fame, and I wasn't good enough for that. But I played and I lettered, and and I've donated money. And they have a group called the John Heisman Club, which if you lettered, you're in this club, and they would travel around the country. Once a year they come out, and I see local people, and they call it the John Heisman Club because John Heisman coached at Oberlin. And and for a while, Oberlin was like a dominating team. They were talking back in the 20s and earlier than that. And of course, I've always given you my trivia question. The last school from the state of Ohio to defeat Ohio State in football, which was Oberlin, I don't know if in 1921. But and then Ohio State didn't play Ohio schools for like 50 or 60 years, and so they started playing up. But anyway, so they call me. So they have a thing called the Hall of Honor, which is like the second cousin to the Hall of Fame and such. And if you did, you represented the school and you had an interesting career. So I actually, this last year was my 50th anniversary. And just by coincidence, they inducted me into that with 3 other people and such. And I guess, I had an interesting career. And there was a guy who got in a year or two before me named Jerry Greenfield. And Jerry had played lacrosse, and he wanted to go to med school and such. But he had an interesting career. He went to he and a buddy of his learned to make ice cream, and they started a company, and it turned out to be Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. And he was an Oberlin graduate, Jerry Greenfield. So that's pretty good company to be in. And I never knew this Ben guy. He didn't go to Oberlin, but you're in college and it's late at night and there's nothing open. This guy would go around the dorms and he'd sell you sandwiches and such. And turned out that I was this guy Ben. And it was Jerry's friend. But anyway, so there's my
Ben and Jerry.
my little braggadocious thing. I'm through with that.
Congratulations on that. Well deserved. Well deserved.
I want to ask you, going back to Jon Gruden's first year, coming back, Al Davis hires him. You were talking about Al Davis hired him over Bill Belichick. When Jon Gruden, because Jon Gruden still coached, I'm going back to Jeff George. Jon Gruden still had Jeff George on that first year. When Jon Gruden got rid of Jeff George and brought in Rich Gannon, how did Al Davis take that? Like him letting go of the big arm, Jeff George, and then bringing in a journeyman quarterback. And I know Jeff George was kind of a journeyman quarterback, but bringing in Rich Gannon, journeyman quarterback over to the Raiders. How did Al Davis? I guess what was his feelings on Jon Gruden making that move? Because of the big arm of Jeff George.
I think between Jeff George, and I might be wrong, but I think we had Donald Hollis and Wade Wilson. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure But we needed a quarterback, and we actually had tried out two quarterbacks. Jeff Garcia, who had played in the league, but was coming in from Canada and had really played well up there. And then Rich Gannon came in, and I wasn't in town for those tryouts, but for some reason, Garcia had a terrible day throwing, what people tell me, and Rich had a great day throwing. And so what's he going to say? He needs a quarterback. Jeff, had a very interesting career. I mean, when he came out, was a great athlete. I mean, built like a safety. He came out and says, "Look, I'm not going to be a safety. I'm a quarterback. And if you're not going to let me play quarterback, don't draft me because I'll just go to law school." And I think he was drafted by New England, and they thought they could convince him no, and I think they traded him to Minnesota. And he's been a nice backup throw around, and then he goes to Kansas City, and again when he went in, he played well, and the big thing was they had Elvis Gerback, big strong arm guy, and Elvis gets hurt, and Rich comes in, and I think he wins like 6 of the last 7 games or 5 of the last 6. I mean, really plays well. They go into the playoffs, and they name Gerback the quarterback, and they lose. So Rich says, "Well, I'm out of here." So he came in, and I don't know that he wasn't really Al's kind of guy, but what's he going to say? There really wasn't anybody out there. But this whole thing just works so well together with him and with John and Rich. And he just was, again, he didn't have the classic motion. And I still remember I was scouting at Fresno, and it was the pro day, and David Carr, Derek Carr's brother, it was the number 1 quarterback taken out. And Pat Hill was the coach, and everyone's standing around, with questions. So I said to him, and Rich had been with us a couple of years. And I said, "Well, what would you say about David Carr's kind of sidearm motion?" He goes, "What about Gannon's sidearm motion?" We taken, but it sort of all came together. With John and Rich, it was John. It just worked so well. And they, somebody had made an audio tape of them talking back and forth in the game, and I always asked, but nobody could find it because I thought that would have been really a priceless thing to have, go back and forth, and they didn't hold anything back.
Yeah,
and Rich, Rich was all business, which is just what John wanted, and that's why he really didn't care for Jeff George. I said, he's going. One time, we would come back, we'd go through the airport and we were waiting and our plane was late or whatever, going back after a game. And So I happened to be sitting next to John. He's having a drink, and John, drank. Yeah, look at that Jeff George. Sitting there with Tommy effing Jones. He was Run's son. Says it was like the ball boy, whatever. You think Brett Favre would sit there with Tommy effing Jones? He'd be buying drinks for his linemen. You think that? Says, I said to Rich one time, "Hey Jeff, do you ever think of taking your lineman out to dinner?" What do you say? No, I never thought about it. He goes, "Jeff, I make a lot of money. Take him out to dinner. I'll pay for it. Okay? Would you do that?" Do you think he did it? Hell no. He didn't. And then, another time, John's talking to him, and he goes, he says, "Jeff, in this, when they come out in this defense, it's crucial that you make this read. Crucial, you got to read. Crucial, 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 crucial." Hey, coach, there's nothing crucial for me. I got $15 million in the bank. And maybe he's trying to be clever, but John was, it just was. So in fact, when we cut Jeff, and John certainly didn't want him, but it was. So we put it out that that it was Al and Bruce Allen. They didn't want to get John involved. Oh, it was Al and Bruce Allen and the personnel people. We just wanted to go another direction. So we kept Gruden out of it. I don't care. You could have told him that much. but Jeff, and then, he went to Washington when Rubisky was there, and I won't get into those stories. Maybe at some point I will, and maybe in the next one. But those were truly remarkable stories about, Terry Rubisky and Jeff George going head to head, and Terry ended up winning on that one too. But that's somewhere down the line. But
I had a follow-up question, and if Jeff is still watching the show, he's gonna love this question. Now, we do our show and we talk about the new acquisitions the Raiders have now, and the fact that Pete Carroll, Saddam asked about Pete Carroll coming in and him bringing in Geno Smith, and I said, you know what? I feel like Geno Smith has a similar type of almost like the same road coming into the Raiders, and I do have the comparison of that of Rich Gannon. Can you help my argument? And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But do you see a Geno Smith almost like the same thing like Rich Gannon coming in to the Raiders and working with the head coach that you can work with, Jeff?
Yeah, they're different types of quarterbacks, obviously. But I think, again, I don't know whatchamacallit, Geno. I've never dealt with him per se. But in seeing the way he carries himself and in seeing the way his teammates talk about him, and obviously the way the coach talks about him, he obviously has that certain intangible that the good quarterbacks have. Again, he's not the youngest guy in the world, but it'll be interesting to see each year, a little guy comes in, he has to sort of reestablish himself that he's still got it. And, but yeah, now Plunkett was certainly younger than Geno, but I thought that was a great hire, a great signing rather, or trade. I guess it was a trade. Yeah. Bring him in to give you, credibility as opposed to, a rookie quarterback or someone, but no, to bring in a guy that it's got to make Pete Carroll so much more comfortable. The guy knows your system, so that's half the battle. So that was pretty smart. The way they've done it now, I think they finally got people in the right spot. Just coming in that first year that Mark took over. When he hired Reggie McKenzie, if there's somebody that needed a truly experienced general manager to come in, that was Mark Davis, because he had nothing to do with the team. He never worked in any other areas. I think, the only thing I ever really heard of him doing was he was trying to sell Raider fanny packs, Raider show, things like that. And to bring in Reggie, who was never had really a position of authority, was just a terrible, terrible hire. And then So then Dennis Allen and all those coaches, it just wasn't working. Then, of course, he brings in, then Gruden gets hired. And the coaches, the what's his name from New England was terrible, and the GM was it just wasn't. So then when Gruden gets hired, was it Greg Papa says, well, Reggie's not going to be there long. He says John's got all the energy in the world, and it takes Reggie 5 minutes to get out of his chair, and but then he brings in Mayock, John. Again, I've always said was a great coach. He was not a good personnel guy. And, Mayock, it was one of those guys on ESPN that never made a bad pick. Well, it's not, when you're on ESPN, oh, I had that guy high. Oh, I didn't like this guy, that kind of thing. It always works in your favor. And it's like a guy that's, betting football games. Oh, I would have won that. I would have won that. Why do I won that? And then, he starts betting. It's a different story when your name is on that. And some of those picks were just dreadful. And not that I followed it anymore, but just reading, the analysis, and it was bad. So now you got a solid coach, you got a GM that's got a lot of experience. And I think that's certainly two things that should bode well for them. And then, last year's head coach, it was crazy how, I'm looking. When what was the name? The head coach that just got fired.
AP.
Oh, Antonio Pierce.
Pierce. That one just kind of. He comes in as the interim head coach, and I think he was what was he 4-4. So the four teams that he beat was it 14. The teams that he beat I guess he was 5-4.
5-4,
I believe.
5-4. So he beat the Broncos, the Chargers, the Jets, and the Giants, who were just dreadful teams, and somehow they beat the Chiefs.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really selling point. And the four teams that he lost to, they got killed.
Oh yeah.
And so where he screwed up, what I thought, and again, I'm on the outside, but I thought this Bisaccia guy who got him to the playoffs. I thought, the players want him. I thought that would have been the guy to hire. He seemed like the players responded. He was a good coach. He'd been around for a long time. And again, I'm not there, but I think in Mark's mind, that's not really a sexy hire. So he gets the New England guy, and that's just, it was a year and a half, and he's out of there. And then Pierce comes in, and, the players want him, and he was a disaster. And so here you go. So it took them long enough, but they finally, I think, got a good situation. Pete, in great shape, he's got a lot of energy. And, from the outside, and I'm not really studying it per se, but I think they got personnel. The tight end looks great. And they addressed the offensive line a bit. And, if these rookies come through, they got the running back. They got the first round pick. They let him go to Green Bay, gets 1,000 yards. And this fifth round guy, he's going to do great. So we'll see.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, I think the biggest thing in this, after the Pete Carroll part of it, was actually getting Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator, actually having a very good and experienced offensive coordinator who can design plays and open it up and go the Al Davis way if he needed to the deep balls, but the run game. I think that's going to be our biggest improvement for this year.
Well, I didn't finish my George Allen story. I just forgot it. But the point being was, an Al said to me, about Jordan. So I just said, would you hire him? He says, I wouldn't hire him. He's a good coach, but I couldn't work with him. And I think that answered why he wouldn't have hired Belichick, because those guys, they want to do it completely their way.
Yeah.
And John came in and he wanted to do things his way. And for the most part, he did, but he was very respectful to Al. And when Al came up with an idea to do something, in fact, I would sit in the coaches meetings before we went into personnel, and Al would go, and Art Shell was there. Hey, Art, have we ever tried this? Okay, we'll do that. And Art, what about doing this? Trying to, oh yeah, we'll do that. And what about it? We'll do this. And then when Gruden was in there, Have we ever tried putting this guy over here? Oh, yeah, we're going to try. We already decided to do it. We're going to do that next week. What about trying this defense? Yeah, we remember we tried that last week. So, I mean, John was, step for step with Al. And, and I think Al did not anticipate what he was getting with Gruden. I think he was getting I thought he was getting a kid that, didn't, but, obviously he didn't. And so that was, I didn't mean to jump around, but that's where I went there. But
I was going to ask, well, I was going to ask one question, but now I kind of want to ask another question with regards to Al Davis hiring coaches. The coaches after Jon Gruden's first tenure that Al Davis hired, was he trying to find, well, I mean, outside of Callahan, because I know that's why he brought him to keep the system. And then North Turner was someone that I'm forgetting his name, ex-Cowboys coach.
Tom Landry.
No, after him. He just got to the Hall of Fame.
Jimmy Johnson?
Jimmy Johnson told Al Davis, hey, hire North Turner. He's a good coach, whoever. That didn't work out. And then Al Davis tried to go back and bring in Art Shell because he regretted firing him before the move back to Oakland. Was the Lane Kiffin hire, he was trying to recreate the Jon Gruden hire, because Al Davis tried to recreate what worked for him before, like getting the speedy receiver and trying to recreate the next
next Gruden,
was the Lane Kiffin hire, was Al Davis trying to recreate the next Gruden with a young offensive guy in Lane Kiffin?
Yeah, I'll get to that. You just start out with Callahan, when he said to me, I'm thinking about trading Jon Gruden. I said, really? He says, in fact, he said, would you take a 1, a 2, and a 3? I said, no. It turns out that's what I believe New England gave to the Jets when they traded for Belichick. Okay. I said, well, why would you trade him? Well, his contract's up this year, and I don't think I can sign him. And I really should have challenged him. I said, you're telling me you couldn't sign him. And I didn't say it. I said that's the first time you told me you couldn't get something done, but I didn't say that. He says, well, would you take 3 1s? I said, well, that's better, but God, I just it's why and I didn't bring up. I should have brought up the whole fiasco after the Bugle year, but I said, it's not broken. Why are you trying to fix something that's not broken? Anyway, he makes the trade. We get 2 1s and a 2 or 2-2, whatever it was. But
2 1s, 2 2s, and $8
But anyway, I thought Callahan was a good hire. Because he was John's coordinator, and the first year, everything really worked well, and the coordinator did a nice job building it. And then the second year, something about if the players felt that Al wasn't backing you, they didn't respect him. And it just, the second year with Bill, he didn't seem to back him. And then we did some goofy stuff in the draft. We want to take this Sam Williams. I had him as a 7th round pick, and he's going to make him and what happened is somebody tells him he's like Charles Haley, which in fact, I think it was Mike Lombardi said, I saw his workout numbers. They're like Charles Haley.
Mike Lombardi.
Yeah, I said this guy, and he mentioned it. I said, no, he's not Charles Haley. He's not even close. And then Al's going to take him in the 2nd round, and we were fighting like hell. And then finally, it was a ridiculous pick. Oh, he's going to give us, 10 years. We're going to get 100 sacks. He had 1 sack in 8 years. And I mean, nice guy, but that was just a ridiculous pick. And we did stuff like that. Mike Mitchell was another guy that we took. It was just, he's looking for the sleeper. But anyway, so that stuff caught up to us. And then again, Norv came in. And again, Al didn't particularly back him. Players saw it. And then, hiring Art again, I couldn't have been stronger against it. And I know Lombardi was very much against it. And I don't know who else he talked to. But, I told him, I said, I don't think he likes to coach. And I gave him an example. I don't know if I told you. So it's really, I brought the story up. Lincoln Kennedy was coming out in the draft. and we were looking very strongly at him. We had like the 12th or 13th pick. And I said to Art, I said, look, Art, I only need you to see one guy, go out to one workout, and that's to see this Lincoln Kennedy, because I think he's a guy that could really help us, and it's a position of need. And he says, well, when is it? And I give him the date. He says, no, I'm going to be in Reno that day. I said, well, what's going on in Reno? Nothing. I'm taking days off. I said, well, can't you change that? This is important. He says, no, now get the hell out of my office. I said, what the heck? Anyway, so I shared that story with Al and a couple other things. And he goes, you bring up a lot of good points, but I may have to hire him anyway, which was crazy. So it was just, but the irony of the Lincoln Kennedy pick was we had drafted a guy. He went one pick ahead of us, and we took a safety out of Texas A&M. I forget his name, but he didn't. He was built well. He didn't really quite play well, but we ended up trading him for Lincoln Kennedy, who came in, and he was great. I mean, he really played well for us. But the Art Shell year was. I mean, the first game that year was. You asked me why he hired Art, and I think that was Al wanted one more chance to have a coach that'll just totally do what he says. He brought by Tom Walsh as the coordinator, and it just was not. It was just and our defensive staff was actually very good. Rob. I was going to say Rob Reiner. Rob. What's his name? Don Martindale. Rob. His dad was the coach. And his brother was the head coach in the Jets. Anyway, Rob Ryan.
Yeah.
Rob Reiner. No, Rob, and we were 2-14, and we won those two games because our defense and those coaches. Again, Rob Ryan and Don Martindale did a hell of a job. And the irony of that year, we were 2-14. The two teams that we beat played in the Super Bowl, Arizona and Pittsburgh. just kind of a funny coincidence. And then, but then you talk about the next year, and I wrote about it. The book was, he calls me up and he says, it was like January 2nd. He says, now, did you watch the ball game? Yeah, I watched a lot of them. He says, well, what coaches were out there that were with the Raiders? And I said, well, Jimmy Harbaugh, well, who else? And he brought up Steve Sarkisian, who was the coordinator with USC. Mm-hmm. He goes, call him up and interview him. But, don't say it's for the head job. But so I call him up, and somebody had his number. I call him up and I said, Steve, Jon Kingdon, I was wondering if I talk about you possibly come back here as a coach. And I didn't say head coach, but as I asked the question, he says, all right, well, I'm driving. I said, well, call me when you get home. He says, I got two young kids. Call me now. It's be a madhouse at my house. So I asked all these questions, and he was great. I mean, bing, 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 bing. So I transcribed the whole thing for him, and I faxed it to Al, and he says, this guy was great. And I said, it's even more impressive because he was doing it off the top of his head driving home. He says, bring him in for an interview. So I bring him in, and I'm not in the interview, but boom, it's great. Bring him in for a second interview. It's good. Bring him in for a third interview. And he brings back Kiffin to be the coordinator and a guy named Mark Jackson to be like his administrative assistant and such. And everything, bing, 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 it looks good. And so Al calls me up, and I just remember it was signing day for the colleges. So I call up USC, and I knew the secretary very well. And I said, can I talk to Steve? He said, all right, well, it's busy time, but all right. So I go in there. So I went back. He said, it's signing day. He said he'll get back to you, but it's going to take a little bit. All right. So I'm waiting. I wait a couple hours or 2 or 3 hours even. I call back. I get the secretary again. She says, he didn't call you? I said, no, he didn't. All right, let me get him. And she comes back, he's still busy. I said, all right. So I call Al up. I said, something's going on. He says, what do you think? Well, I called him. They said he'd get back to me a little bit. Call him in 3 hours. He doesn't call me back. And, the secretary, I got a feeling, she didn't tell me anything, but I got a feeling something's going on. How do you know her? Well, I see, and she's always very cordial. We have a nice relationship. So anyway, so I call his agent, and I get the agent, and I said, I'm trying to get hold of Steve to talk about the job. And, he hadn't, oh, no, he still wants the job, All right, so I call Al up, and I said, well, I talked to the agent. He said he still, wants to talk about it. He said, well, he just called me. He's turning down the job. And that was that. So what happened, I don't know if somebody badmouthed it, maybe Pete Carroll did, but nobody ever got back to it. So he tells this guy, John Herrera, to go down there and try and talk to him again, which I'm glad he didn't ask me to do it. So he goes down there, and somehow he runs into Kiffin. And he says, well, he really doesn't want the job, Sarkisian. I said, well, would you like to come back for an interview? And he comes back for an interview. And, Al in fact, the story's gotten out, that Sarkisian turned us down. And, we didn't offer him the job, blah, 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 which, I'm not going to say anything about it. So Kiffin comes in and he gives him the job, and then Lane, again, I think his attitude, and I think he even said, you know what, I'm doing it my way. He doesn't like it, screw him. And it wasn't good. And then so he's gone. And then, so it's just another story that it's not the funniest thing. But, after that, that hole, he's going to have Sebastian try a 70-yard field goal or something, whatever. So he's going to get fired. So in the paper the next day, they have pictures like 5 people who might get hired. And it was Tom Cable, all these coaches. And then they had a picture of Paul Hackett. So I hadn't seen the paper. So I was getting in my car. I was going to the office, and my wife happens to walk out, and she had the paper. She says, do you look like Paul Hackett? I said, no, he's like 10 years older than me or whatever. So I get in the office, and people are kind of laughing. And he says, you're up for the head job? I said, what are you talking about? And they show me, and it's a picture of me. But, I had it was a training camp picture. And Paul, we had hired him after the official photos were taken. But I had the Raider hat, and I had the sunglasses, and Paul Hackett always had the Raider hat and sunglasses. So I call up the paper just for the heck of it. And it was like the Oakland Tribune, East Bay Times. And so they're all in one. But I get the sports department. I said, I'm reading the paper, and you have a picture of all these people. And I'm looking at this picture of Paul Hackett, and I'm pretty sure that's Jon Kingdon, who's kind of in charge of the scouting department. The guy says, no, it isn't. I said, it isn't. No, I checked with the beat guy. He said that's Paul Hackett. He says, anything else? Yeah, can I say one more thing? He said, what's that? I said, the fact is I am Jon Kingdon, and that's my picture. Oh, my God. And today, the next day, they actually put in a corrected photo. It's pretty funny that the way that worked. So
that year, that 2007, when they hired Kiffin, was Ken Wisenhunt the OCs? Speaking about the 2 teams that made it to the Super Bowl that year, the Steelers and the Cardinals. I remember them saying during that Super Bowl that Ken Wisenhunt was one of the leading candidates to take over the Raiders as head coach. Was Ken Wisenhunt, was he really a candidate? And if he was, how come, or what happened where he didn't end up going to Oakland to be head coach?
No, I don't really know of anyone besides Kiffin. I think that was it, and that was done. Could you get me a soda out of the refrigerator, please? Yeah, I think that was it. I heard his name too, but I think the whole Kiffin came in, and that thing was that was it. It was there was a guy. Here's another story. It has nothing to do with this per se, but we have Randy Moss was with us. We make the trade, and just a talented son of a gun. But I always found he was sort of a front runner, and we started out the first year, played hard, and this and that, but the team wasn't that good, and he kind of quit on us. And so this is This was great because I think Kiffin was still there, and so we're in the draft meeting. Yeah, I never told this story. So we're in the draft meeting, and everyone's there, and we don't really have a pro personnel guy because Lombardi's about to get fired. Now's not dealing with him, and I guess so. A guy comes in and says, "Yeah, the New England agreed we're going to get a 6th-round pick for Randy Moss." He goes, "What? We're only getting a 6." So the only person that wasn't in the meeting was this guy, Mark Jackson. Now, it just made no sense that he would use Mark Jackson, that Mark Jackson wouldn't have said, what do you want to get for the pick? What's the least you get? What's your most to pick? Do you want to build? But Mark had never done any of this stuff. So we're in the room, and it's just the scouts now. And Al, says, "Get me Bill Belichick on the phone." So he calls up, "What are you, taking advantage of this guy? You're only giving a 6th?" And Belichick goes, because he's on the speakerphone, he goes, "It's what he asked for. I'm going to give him more." He says, "Well, what do you want?" And Al again, he could have done it so much better. "Well, I'd make it a 4th, but if he catches this, we'll make it a 3rd. If you go to the Super Bowl, it's a 2nd. Give me a 4th. All right. So he took a 4th. So now I got a call, and this is like a year ago. And there's a guy that writes for The Athletic, and I think he's out of Seattle. He says, "I want to do a story about what happened with the Randy Moss trade." So I said, well, and people said, well, they called people, well, ask Jon Kingdon. And I said, well, look, I tell you, and I told him the story exactly what you said. I said it had to be Mark Jackson. And then, the fact he'd only take a 6th, this is a guy that really never did it. And it just made no sense to me. So Mark, at this point, he was like the athletic director at Villanova. So I said, well, you need to I told him the whole story. And then he called up Bruce Kebrick. Bruce told him exactly the same story that I told because he was in the room. And then Mark Jackson kind of denies it. So I said, he said, well, Mark denies anything. He just said he made a call, but he didn't talk to him. So I said, look, I said, the only other person that will confirm it, call up Belichick. And I guess Belichick wouldn't talk about it. So the story never got written. But that's as far as I know, the story of Randy Moss getting traded. And then we had the 4th-round pick, and we had a guy at University of Cincinnati that we had as a later pick, Calvin Branch, who was a wonderful scout. He had him as like a 6th-round pick or something, but the guy ran fast, so we took him, and he didn't make the team. So there you go.
And then I did wanted to ask you, and I know you just talked about Art Shell. But when Al Davis, when he would hire coaches, before the last 10 years, hiring guys like Tom Flores, and then Art Shell, the first and then having Amy Trask, becoming CEO of the Raiders. There was this big thing, not big thing, but Al Davis was the first one to hire people who, I guess you can say, wouldn't be hired in these positions anywhere else. And but this whole rule became the Rooney Rule. And I have this right here. Amy Trask had said in an interview once with writer Hondo Carpenter that Al Davis did not need a rule named after him to follow something that he believed. With this whole thing with Al Davis, just hiring people who can do the job compared to people seeing it as you're just hiring them because they're minorities. What was Al Davis's philosophy in giving these guys opportunities? Because it's even like with John Madden, who was just a young 32, 33-year-old, 2 years into the NFL as a coach, as a linebackers coach, taking the job. What did Al Davis see in these coaches and like Amy Trask, where he knew, like, what, they can take me to that next level, or they're the right fit for that moment that I need in these positions? What was his philosophy in hiring people that most likely probably wouldn't get hired in these positions anywhere else?
Well, Tom was a wonderful coach, and and I've talked to people like David Hum and other people. asked about how was Tom, and they thought he was great. They thought it was a great hire. It's very nice that he was Hispanic, but no, there was just no question about that. Or oh my God, he hired a Hispanic guy. But it's very nice, he got the credit for it. And just as a funny thing, when Tom, after he retired, he did the color on the radio, and we were playing in Mexico City, and I happened to drive over. I took the bus over. There weren't a lot of people. It was like the staff people, and we had a long walk to the stadium in Mexico City, which is just sort of a sideline story. And I'm walking with him, and suddenly heads are turning, and you hear Tom Flores. He was like a god down there, and he says he said I'm not stopping, but he was signing and running and not even walking. But it was great how much pride the Hispanic community in America took. But to see it in Mexico City was just fabulous, and that was a lot of fun. So, but like I said, Al, I got credit for it, and that's fine. But there was his thing. Again, he talked to Ray Perkins, he talked to people, but Tom was very, very deserving of that. And then Art situation, he was the right coach at that time because Mike Shanahan came in, and Mike got put in a very difficult situation where he was only allowed to hire 3 coaches. It was Alex Gibbs was a very good offensive line coach, and Pete Rodriguez was the Steams coach, and Nick Nicolau was the receivers coach. But he did things. He kind of threw out a lot of things, and he changed the playbook a lot of ways, made it a lot simpler. And Tom said, I always wanted to do that too, but I couldn't because we just were successful. You can't make a total change like that. And then, but he did things very differently, and that bothered the players. You couldn't sit on your helmet, little things like that. We used to, you run a play, the coaches would run out there, they tell you what you did right or wrong. And, the way Mike did it, you'd run a play and there was no coaching. We'll do it in the meeting room. And instead of 40 plays, you have 80 plays. And, Al wasn't crazy about that. And then his system, he had the West Coast system and he didn't adjust to it. And the players, just weren't comfortable with Mike doing it. And it just, and believe me, Mike was a very good, and you could see he was a wonderful coach, So in fact, he was up for, he went to the Niners as the coordinator. And I heard the story that the Broncos then wanted to hire him, but they weren't going to let him make his own staff. And he said, the heck with it. I'll stay with the Niners because I went through that with the Raiders. And so he had his own staff and had a lot of success there. But, again, he should have adjusted slower for these players. And then when Art came in, we had a lot of success because we went back to doing things the way the players were comfortable doing it. And he had Terry was the coordinator, and Terry helped him a great deal in what he did. And then, when Terry eventually left, things got a little more difficult, and Al made the change. But Art was the right man at that time to bring things correctly back. And he had, in fact, this is I was the advanced man that one year because it was just whatever. So it was at Lee Hamilton was a guy out of San Diego, and he called me up, and I was doing the radio, and that was a big station. He says, "So let me ask you a question: did Al hire Art because he was black?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Lee, he hired him because he was silver and black." I've been waiting for that question. It really hit, and so Art had a great run, up and then things kind of settled down, and then he was very upset when Mike replaced him, and Mike really didn't do a very good job, and then Joe came in, and I thought Joe was a very good coach, but that was not the right team. If he was the coach, he needed to be on a team that Madden had coached, veteran guys. That team was just, it was uncoachable. And I feel bad, for that. And then, then when the whole thing with Gruden came in, and it took a little time, and us, so that first year, was that it was the second, I think it was the first year, it was the game What was John's first year that we hired him? Was it
98.
90?
I'm sorry, 90. Yeah, 98.
Yeah, that's right, because it was good. So the next year, I think we were 8-8. So the next year was 99, 2000, and the last game of the year was that Chief game.
Yeah,
which was just an amazing game. You know, I think we were 7-8, and it's cold, and the Chiefs need to beat us to make the playoffs.
Yeah,
and and it's New Year's and such, and we're down 14-0 before the Chiefs even take a snap. You know, they scored on a punt return, and they scored on an interception, and it's 14-0, and I think they then kick a field goal, whatever. And then I still remember, and then we block a punt. I think it was Kenny Shedd. It's only at 17-7.
Yeah.
And then and then we just kick it into gear. And there's like Wheatley makes a great run at the end of the half. We throw an inside pitch to Napoleon Kaufman. And so we're up 21-17, and now it's back and forth. And then, so we're down by 3 late in the game, and it's 4th and like 15. And we drop back, and we throw an incomplete pass, game's over. But the official threw a flag that one of our linemen jumped early. Oh, no, we declined. Well, that's the play is dead. And he makes a completion for like 18 yards to Timmy Brown. And I think it was Joe Nedney, and he hits the field goal, to put it into overtime. And then we hit Brown, get down the field, and we kicked the winning field goal. And if you remember, Gruden running around like a maniac. I mean, it was great. And I remember Al talking about, he didn't say it a lot, but he says, if we lost that game, I was thinking about firing him. It was crazy, but but that was great. And then just things, with he and Gannon, and we just had a great team. We did a great job of signing the free agents. Eric Allen, Torrey James was a wonderful player. Then we signed Jerry Rice. I don't know. Yeah, when we signed Rice in, who was just I didn't get to know him particularly well, because I'm on the road. But we bring him in, and we got the mini camp, and the ball gets overthrown, and but the receivers usually just let it go. Jerry goes and gets the ball, hands it to the ball boy. I said, now that is very cool. And then it's the rookies and the veterans. All right, the veterans taking in, they're making the rookies run gassers. And I think Timmy Brown stayed out there, but Timmy Brown's out there, and Jerry, and they come on, guys, you're doing great. And they're done. He shakes their hands, and then we're at training camp, and there was a table. They put souvenirs out there, like guys to sign it. And they'd ask these guys, players, would you sign it? And some did and some didn't. But Jerry would come in every morning, and he'd check each item to make sure he signed it. I mean, little things like that. But just watching him, he played great. In fact, again, I've been watching these games on YouTube. They got the complete games from the year 2000, 2001, and such, and just they're fun to promote. And that really was a wonderful team. The line was great, and just with Gruden, and then the Callahan year, we did a lot of great stuff and such. And if we had played any other team but Tampa in that Super Bowl, there's no way we'd have lost. And obviously Barrett Robbins, went off the deep end. He was bipolar, and I guess the pressure of the whole thing got to him. And, it just, and just one other thing, just to kind of be a little defensive, because we lost by 28 points, whatever it was. But if you remember, we were within 17 points. And we scored, and the other teams got 3rd and long, and I think Woodson got a pass interference. All right, they get 3 more plays, and then Woodson missed the coverage, and they get another first down. Now we get the ball back with 4 minutes to go, and we just forcing it down. They get the 2 interceptions. So the game, if we had gotten that ball back with like 9 minutes and we score, suddenly anything could happen. But
yeah, I remember Jerry Porter got that one touchdown at the back of the end zone that John Gruden tried to challenge, and John Gruden was getting a little nervous. He's like, "Wait, we had this lead, going into halftime, and now they're slowly climbing back. And then it was, the interceptions that got returned back that basically put the game away.
Got two of them. Derek
Yeah.
Brooks. Well, he was a guy we really tried to draft. We kept trying to trade up and couldn't get him, but boy, he was great. But yeah.
With going back to you mentioned Jerry Rice. Tim Brown has been doing a lot of interviews on YouTube lately, and he talks about when Jerry Rice came over, and I guess seeing what Tim Brown at firsthand, what Tim Brown went through in his career as a Raider, with the Raiders, going through so many head coaches and so many offensive coordinators and so many quarterbacks, and was not right there behind Jerry Rice, but was like second to Jerry Rice in numbers. And he had said that, Jerry Rice came up to him and said, "Man, I don't know how you did it, but I mean, you did your thing." Jerry Rice told Tim Brown. Tim Brown has also said that when it came to his relationship with Al Davis, it was kind of up and down, that Al Davis wanted him to play good, but not great, because Al Davis didn't want to, I guess, get to that situation where he had to pay Tim Brown a lot of money for his next contract. And I know Tim Brown was about to get signed with the Broncos, and then, Al Davis was able to match that offer. But how was that relationship with Tim Brown and Al Davis? Those 16 years, I believe.
It was interesting, and we put a chapter. The three guys that Al had problems with were Stabler, Marcus Allen, and Gruden. Which, I mean, you can't get three better guys, to have on your team and such. And and I think our theory was they were sort of the face of the team, and such. And so I don't know that Timmy was a spokesman up front, but he wasn't quite. He really, I don't think, wanted to fill that role. But he was very happy to be a leader on the team, and I don't think it ever became an issue in that sense. And no, I just I was just so relieved when he got that big contract. And I remembered I was walking down the hall and Tim was coming the other way. In fact, I was with Kebrick, and I said, Tim, I'm really happy that you're here, and I hope you feel good about it too. Oh yeah, no, I'm good. So it was just he was just a wonderful player and just a great person, great leader. He had that one. Can't remember. I think it was his second year. He blew his knee out on a punt return, and but God, what a great player. And then with Jeff George, it was fun. He was great. He was great with all of them. It's just I remember even like in his 14th or 15th year, we were playing the Chiefs. It wasn't that late. It was, and he returns a punt for a touchdown.
Yeah.
And he was a true favorite. I love the guy.
88 yards. I remember that play. Yeah. That was back when the games weren't televised because of the they had the blackouts in the Bay Area. I listened to that game live, and Greg Papa, and that came the play before. Because Tim Brown had to take over for Dunn, the receiver.
Yeah, David Dunn. Yeah,
David Dunn.
No, David Dunn was an agent. It was Derek. Wasn't it Derek Dunn? I think, or
anyway, it started with a D. I think it was
number 88.
Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah.
And I remember the game. He lost the punt job. Dunn did against the Cardinals because he went to go try to dive for a punt, and then they ended up bouncing off of him. The Cardinals got it. Raiders lost that game. They cut him. Tim Brown takes over as the punt returner, but all his job was just free, fair catch. Just get the possession, and then we'll just run it from there. And I remember that play, that 188-yarder against the Chiefs, because he actually did a fair catch. And I guess the Chiefs were offsides or something. They had to re-kick it. So, okay. And I guess they told Tim Brown, and Tim Brown told the story. They told Tim Brown, hey, try running it. I think it was Randy Jordan told him, just try to run it. And okay, whatever. Tim Brown, gets the ball. He sees there's an opening, and he takes off to the right, and he just outruns all these guys going down the Raiders sideline. John Gruden's up in there jumping up and down. Tim Brown comes into the end zone. I think he runs right into the black hole side of the Coliseum, and I'm listening to the game as a kid, and I'm listening to Greg Papa call out the play, and that became like my favorite play once I got to see the replay of it. That became like my favorite Tim Brown highlight because Tim Brown has a, and I think he still has the record, or he still has the whatever you call it, he's the oldest player to return a punt for a touchdown. Still to this day, he's the oldest player to return a punt in NFL history for a touchdown. And that was one of my favorite plays for Tim Brown. And I feel like Tim Brown was even though he had all the accolades, with all the like basically being like behind Jerry Rice for the most part, other receivers that surpassed him after he retired. But I feel like Tim Brown is underrated to the fact where after everything that he went through with the Raiders, he stayed, for the most part, he stayed loyal with the Raiders, and dealt with, like I said, the different coaches, different coordinators, different quarterbacks, and he was still able to put up numbers each year. He had that 2 catches per game streak that he had for a long time. He had 1,000-yard receptions for majority, each season, the majority of his career. I feel like Tim Brown was underrated in that fact that people forget how much he went through. And I honestly believe that Al Davis, if the way Tim Brown puts it, that maybe Al Davis didn't show him or didn't tell him how much he liked having Tim Brown on the team. I felt like Al Davis really cared for Tim Brown, but probably had like that wall there because of, like you said, the Stablers and the Marcus Allens and the John Grudens. Let me just kind of keep but Tim Brown stayed loyal. That last year, was that a Al Davis move, or was that a Norv Turner move where they let go of Tim Brown and they ended up going to the Buccaneers?
Probably Al's move. I think Tim was ready to move on too. I don't think the team was going to be that good. And, the opportunity to work with Gruden again with no resentment at all either way.
Yeah.
But
anything, Ken?
Oh yeah, I don't use my government name on here.
Oh, my bad. Asylum.
I was just, the Raiders have been known to have players that have personality, even coaches with the whole Gruden and everything. But we've had many personalities on this team that obviously did not work with other teams, and they would come here and they always seem to work. How did Al Davis deal with all these personalities of all these players? I mean, you got the Matuzaks, the Ted Hendricks. I mean, we've got a long list of personalities. What was
George
Al
Blanda?
Oh yeah. What was it about Al Davis that always seemed to be able to make this work?
Well, I think he gave them their space. I mean, we had just real quick, we had traded for Charlie Hanna. Started in the Super Bowl in '83 at left guard. We had traded Dave Browning for Charlie Hanna. And, just reading that, Charlie Hanna, he's such a distraction in our locker room, this and that. And he came to our locker room. Nobody noticed him. I mean, in the sense that he didn't stand out. He was a very fine player. That was John Hanna's brother, and was a very good player for us. Started in the Super Bowl in that way. And, he allowed players to, speak their minds. We didn't have a lot of rules, and it was fine. Where Ted, my first year in '79, it's my first year at training camp. I got hired in '78, but that was after training camp, and so I'm there out in front, in front of there's a gate. You get in there, and I'm standing there, and the players are out on the field and they're warming up, and the gate opens, and there's this completely naked woman walks in through the gate, and I'm like, I don't know. So in fact, somebody took a picture, but I kind of intentionally turned my back. So if somebody said to me, well, why didn't you stop her? Well, I didn't see her, kind of thing. But it turned out it was Hendricks that hired this woman. She took a whole lap around the whole practice facility, and everybody laughed about it. Nobody got upset, that kind of thing. But you just go down the line, and even guys that, like we said, Matuzak, came in well. Teddy Hendricks, Matuzak was out there a lot of ways, but no, Ted Hendricks was just a lot of fun, that kind of thing. But he, they just loved having him, and he was such a fine player. And we can go through a lot of them like that. Look, we brought in Chester McLaughlin that a lot of people didn't want to do, and in the short term, he was a dominant player. But the other thing that he liked to do was projecting guys to different positions, which I think when they did it, I said, geez, look how smart he is. And one of my favorite, Ethan Horton, was a first round pick of the Chiefs. He was like 6'3", maybe 225, a running back. And for some reason it didn't fit. And we bring him in as a tight end, and he fit like a glove. He made the Pro Bowl, that kind of thing. Now, there's another story about that was kind of funny was, Terry Rubisky, he was the tight end coach, and he was the offensive coordinator. So, Al is really excited about Ethan Horton, and he's coming in. So Terry told me a story that Al called him up and said, did Ethan come in? Yeah, he worked out this morning. Well, did you work him out? I said, no, we had meetings with the coaches, and I didn't get a chance to work with him. What the hell are you doing? Why couldn't you work with him? I don't know what the F you're doing, which is, you just roll, you just accept it. It's not a big issue. And whatchamacallit? So later that day, Al called Terry back, and Terry doesn't call him back. So the next day, Al calls Terry, and he gets his Terry, did you get the message that I wanted to talk to you yesterday? He says, yes, I did. Well, why didn't you call me back? And Terry goes, I can only be MF by you once a day. So he goes, so what did he say? He says, okay. Anyway, but the point was that, Ethan turned out really well. Tyrone Wheatley comes in and becomes just a dominant player that you thought he would be. I mean, gosh, I just saw that play against the Chiefs where he carried like 5 people into the end zone. I mean, he's coaching somewhere, I believe. But, I think he was in like the U.S. league, one of these spring leagues. But he was a fine player. I just go, Lester Hayes making him a corner, oh no, and he was I could be line, I'll be a safety. You're playing corner, and they were just Lyle Alzado. There you go, another one, which is funny because Alzado played with Denver, he played with Cleveland. He comes to us, and you say, hey, who did Lyle play with? Oh, he was a Raider, that kind of thing, and he really played awfully well. Obviously, that it was unfortunate with the. There's another one that unfortunately died, and he had the brain cancer. But, again, one year I'm at camp, and whoever was doing our PR, we didn't have a PR director. Whoever was doing it, Al didn't like him. Just boots him to go back to the office. He says to me, "You be the PR director now." Because I'd been a sports editor in college and whatever, so I'm doing it. So I get a call. I get this. So I walk into the office afterwards. I'm looking at messages, and everybody's looking at me. Like I got this. So I look at a message and it says, Maria Shriver would like you to call. Please call back Maria Shriver. And they're looking at me. I said, that Maria, she just won't leave me alone. Well, which is not, of course not. So I said, but I'm going to, hey, I'll call Maria. So I call the office and I get her producer of her show. And she said, and she had a show on ABC or whatever the station was. And I get her producer and says, well, I want to confirm that, I'm supposed to interview Lyle Alzado tomorrow on the show. And I said, well, I think you might have sprained something. Let me check something. I'll get back to you. So I went back to, I see that, it says Lyle around. Did he get hurt? He says, he x-rayed, he tore cartilage. He can go down and get a scope on his knee the next day. So I called the guy up and I said, he's got to get a scope on his knee. He's going down tomorrow. So, I'm not sure that we can get it done. He said, all right, well, looking. So I watched the show and they're interviewing Lyle as he's being wheeled into the, into surgery. It's crazy. So that was my, so anyway, so Lyle was, He was a genuine character, and there was guys you could kid around with a little bit. I never kidded around with Lyle. It was all business. I didn't want to say the wrong thing to him, and but gosh, that whole line with Lyle and Reggie Kinlaw and Howie, Billy Pickell, Greg Townsend. I mean, that was quite a group. David Stalls actually played well for that 1 year for us as well. So that was yeah. But again, the whole thing was they let them be themselves. Unless they were, I can't really come to mind. But then, like I said, the things changed. Chester was himself, but it was not a good self. And Darrell Russell was himself, but it wasn't a good self. And, it was tough. We didn't have, and Al was sort of getting on, whereas when he was younger, he could handle those guys. And, those guys were in their own world, and they were making so much money now that it could be an issue that, hey, you want to cut me? They wouldn't say those, but, well, I got a lot of money. I don't need to listen to somebody like that. So I think things changed that way, as opposed to back when, the team was really just so dominant every single year.
You think that's why, even like a silence like with coaches, you think that's why guys like John Madden and then Matuzak, Alzado, even Howie Long, they had Howie Long had like what, 1 or 2 movies after he played, and Matuzak was in a couple movies, and Alzado was trying to get into acting, and of course John Madden doing the beer commercials, and then his character, not character, but like the way he was doing the football games. Do you think because they were Raiders and Al Davis allowed them to be themselves, that had them discovered by I guess Hollywood for the players, and then basically being able to shift into the next chapter of their lives after football seamlessly because Al Davis allowed them to be themselves? And I mean, it happens to be defensive ends for the most part, Matuzak, Alzado, and Howie Long. But you think it's because of the Raider way these guys were able to, I guess, be caricatures of themselves in TV and film and all that?
Well, I don't know if they were caricatures. They were themselves. Maybe they were caricatures, actually, as opposed to being. But I think a lot of it had to do with, one, the team was very successful. 2, we were on national TV. So this is, a lot of this before I got there, always on national TV. And 3, these guys had a lot of exposure, and they were entertaining and fun to watch. In fact, I remember I had a friend of mine named Bert Armis, who was a TV writer, and he was a producer, director on. They did a remake of Dragnet, and so I went to see him one time, and there's Lyle, and he said, "What are you doing here?" Well, I was friends with this guy, and Lyle was walking around without a shirt on. I mean, he really looked good. So yeah, I think that had a lot to do with it. That they got the exposure, and people got to see these guys are kind of fun. And obviously they're larger than life and characters, and people knew them and people could recognize them. Matuzak was a very good actor. I saw him in an episode of MASH. He was very good. He was in a movie called Caveman. And now I talk to a lot of people, and these young people, I don't know, John Matuzak, who was that guy? I said, did you ever see the movie
Goonies?
Goonies. Yeah, I saw that. He was the guy. He was the monster. That was John Matuzak. So
he even wore a Raiders shirt in that to
I didn't know that. But he did in fact, he was doing a movie called Caveman. I think he was still playing, and it was with Ringo Starr was in it, and Barbara Bach was in it, and one time he came by, he says, "Could you do lines with me?" And basically, he was just grunting these things. I'd read the line. It's just a shame that his hard living kind of caught up to him too. That was a shame. But I just to kind of, I don't want to jump away. And if you have something else, but I had a kind of a funny story that I really wish I'd put in the book. Was Al, one day Al called me up, and he goes, What do you know about Dominique Wilkins? If you remember, he was a great basketball player with Atlanta. And we had season tickets to the Clippers. And, they played at the USC facility. It wasn't a very good facility, but we had 2 at center court, 2 under the basket. And the team wasn't very good. But if I was in town, I call up a guy and we go to the game, and I happen to go to it. So I said to Al, he says, what do you know about Dominique Wilkins? I said, well, ironically, about 2 weeks ago, I went to the Clippers game and saw him play. Now, I'm not studying him, but he stood out. He ran the court well. He shot. He played deep. He really looked a good player. He said, I'm not going to ask him, what the hell he asked me? He goes, well, Donald Sterling, who was the owner of the Clippers, who Al was good friends with until he came out with these racist and sexist things, and he dropped them like a hot rock. But he says Donald Sterling called him up and said, they're looking about trading for Dominique Wilkins. So, Al, knows who he is, but he says, well, so what do you think? And so I told him what I thought, and he says, I saw one game, but I'd watch him on TV. But if they're asking for a fair amount, whatever it is, I would make the trade. But I think his contract's up this year. So why would you trade for a guy that you're going to get rid of in 2 months? Oh, no, they'll be able to sign him. So the next day the trade is made. Now, I'm not so presumptuous that, they got a whole scouting department. So Al calls up, hey, that's your trade. I told him my top scout tends to make the trade. Anyway, so now when the next time the Clippers are on TV, I'm watching him, says he better play. And he played well. And I was right on both counts because after the end of the season, he signed with Boston. Well, he would call me for anything. And I knew that one pretty good. And now here's another one. I forgot this. This is a funny story, I never told this, but this is pretty good. So we played a preseason game, and I forgot who we were playing, but it was like the first year that ESPN was broadcasting football games, and Roy Firestone was the color guy. So I was like I think Ron Wolf didn't go. He was on the road. So I'm like the only guy in the office and personnel that didn't make the trip. I shouldn't say that. Scouts didn't go, but I know he's going to call me after the game. And I'm sitting there and I'm taking notes because I know he's going to call, what I thought about this player and that player. And so I'm watching it, and he calls me, of course, and I give what's going on, this and that. And he says, well, how was the broadcast? Well, the color guy was a guy named Roy Firestone, who was at an ESPN show. He's out of LA. And so he says, well, how was the broadcast? I said, they showed it well in the playbook. This Roy Firestone, he really took a lot of shots at us, that I didn't think were deserved. He attacked Methuselah. What? We're giving that son of a bitch home a lift on our plane? What the hell is this? I'm not letting him. He's not flying with us. So I'm going, uh-oh. So the next day, Al Locasal came up to my office. He said, you really made it a real difficult situation. I said, Al, I am really sorry. If I knew Firestone would, because he come to him, oh, yeah, we'll give you a ride back. I said, well, what happened? Well, we got him on the plane before Al was there and got him in the back, and we held him back until Al got off the plane. Oh, gosh.
Pull a Lane Kiffin and leave him in another country.
Yeah. That's what I was just thinking, too.
Oh, Lord, that was crazy. So those were stories. This one wasn't the most, but we scrimmaged the Cowboy. Our training camps were always closed. You really, if someone was out there, you just they were there for some reason, special reason. So we were scrimmaging the Cowboys in Austin, Texas. So I'm walking with them onto the field, and it's unbelievable. The place is packed. And they got souvenir stands and food stands. It's just almost like going into a game. And Al said, this is amazing. This is really great. I said, thinking about doing it? Oh, I'd never do this. Anyway, it was just, he did it his way, and that was that. So,
we appreciate you coming on. And I know, when you're talking about Methuselah, that's one of the first stories that's in this book is Methuselah and him taking you to leaving your car behind and taking you to places. And so
first he was trying to keep up with Matuzak's car. Then it's the whole that was an amazing little I love that.
People go on Amazon, get this book, because I'm telling you, like I said, once I really found time to start reading this a couple years back, I couldn't put it down. I was reading it in the car. I was driving and I was reading this book. So go there to Amazon and Asylum put the link in the comment section. Go there, check that out. So we want to thank you.
And again, also the audiobook. I mean, the guy who the narrator who did it, the guy that they hired to do it, he does an amazing job reading the book. I mean, I've listened to it at work numerous times. I listened to it on drives. If you can't, you have bad eyes or just don't have time to read, go to Audible, download the book. It is well worth the listen.
I've had nothing. I'm glad you say that. This guy, I guess, heard we were doing a book, and he contacted Steve Corcoran. And I guess he does books and such. And I love the Raiders and this and that. And he sent a sample. And, it sounded fine. And, Steve, I actually never heard the sample, but Steve, said this guy could be good. And then, I guess he does a great Al Davis imitation.
Oh, yes. He does a great Al Davis. When you hear him going, it's almost like, his Al Davis is almost like Al Davis was in the room.
Yeah. Anyway,
especially the Raiders.
They should have had him doing that at ESPN when they were doing the Al Davis and the
Al Davis versus Roselle.
Yeah, because the guy who they had, I don't know, he wasn't it. But thank you, Jon Kingdon. Thank you. We appreciate you for coming on. And I know it was kind of last minute, but we're like, wait a minute, 4th of July is coming. It's Al Davis's birthday. We gotta get Jon on. So we appreciate you coming on, and we try to push his book.
Maybe next time we'll have Bruce Kubrick with you, and we can do this again.
I'll hook up with Bruce or Steve or one or the other or both. That'd be great if you can get. Can you get enough screens on the screen there?
Oh yeah,
we could do it. We could do it. We could have all three of you guys with us and be able to have everybody on here.
No, that'd be great. Hey, this is always fun. Thank you. It's a great flashback for me too. I love sharing the stories.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Solemn, any last words?
No, I mean, this was a good day. It was a good day to be alive.
Appreciate it.
I love these stories. I really do.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to end this show. Usually we end the show with a word from Raider Milk, but we're going to end the show. I put together basically the main parts of Al Davis's induction speech into the Hall of Fame. So we're going to end the broadcast that way. Once again, thank you, Jon Kingdon, for coming on. And we always love the stories, especially because our show is about history for the most part. And we appreciate you coming on and telling authentic, real stories from someone who was there firsthand. So we appreciate you. We will end this stream right now, but like I said, we're going to play this video with Al Davis, and it's going to go to the end. So
I'm sorry. You know what? Can I just say two more quick things?
Oh yeah.
There were two Raider people that passed away that were really favorites of mine. A guy named Morris Bradshaw passed away. And they had this amazing memorial service for him. Must have been 500 people for him. And in fact, it was over at the Coliseum, Oakland Coliseum, inside. And that was just, so many people came by for that. And then John Vella, was a great offensive lineman. He passed away too. And Phil Villapiano got up and spoke. And it was just unbelievably entertaining. And next time I'll talk about that, and maybe I've got Phil's number. He'd be great on this show too.
Oh, we would love to have Phil on this show.
I'll track down Phil if we can do it. But anyway, those are two guys that were really good friends. I got the really special people. And anyway, that's it. I'm done.
Yes,
I will hit you up at a later time, and we will talk about who else you could bring on and have you on as well, and put a show together just for that.
That'd be great.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Of course, if you just came on, I saw Vincent's on here. Hey, watch the replay. I know Vincent watches the replay. I hope you got your stuff, Vincent, because we sent that out. And I know you should have got it in. So hopefully it delivered. If not, I'm going to have to tell the post office something.
But just tell Vincent it's Kingdon. He's got Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Vincent. I appreciate the comment. That was great.
Hey, Vincent, get this book on Amazon. So it's a great read. Oops. I hit my mic. All right, everybody. That's the end of our show. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Once again, thank you, Jon Kingdon, for coming on. We appreciate you. We're going to end this show a new way for this episode with excerpts from Al Davis's induction speech going into the Hall of Fame. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you guys next week on the Cage Match, 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. All right. Everyone, take care. Have a good night. See you next week. Peace out.
There's 7 Raiders out there. Now those 7 Raiders are in the Hall of Fame. They need a scout, an assistant coach, and a head coach, and a commissioner, general manager, and an owner. And today, they get the best. And he walks down that stadium, crowd cheers, the public address announcer says simply, from the Raiders, Al Davis. He can't be denied. His dream today becomes a reality. Al Davis.
I learned early on in life that if you're going to lead, if you're going to dominate, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, is not necessarily right. You must treat people in a paramilitary situation the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated. To do that, you must learn about them, learn their cultures, and allow for their individual differences. We never wanted our players, or even our friends, to fit into rigid personality molds. There's a place in this world for mavericks. Stand up for principle. Defy custom at times. Be right. Do not hurt others. That individualism encouraged me to go forward, and my heroes when I was a young boy dared me to dream. As a famous American said, I had a dream to someday build and maintain the finest organization in the history of sports. An organization that would be the most imitated, the most respected, and the most feared organization in its field. A standard of excellence by which all others would be judged. You know, it was in 1963 that it was on to Oakland. I was 33 years old. I was the head coach, general manager. And I can remember attack, pressure, the vertical game, the bump and run, just win, baby, dominate, commitment to excellence, the famed silver and black, pro football's dynamic organization, take what you want, pride and poise, and I could go on and on. The reborn players, the holy roller, the miracles of George Blanda, ghost to the post, the immaculate reception, but time doesn't allow it. I want to pay tribute to the vision of a man such as Ed McGaw, who was one of the founders of the Raiders, and whose confidence in the destiny of the Raiders and myself never wavered. 2 other fine gentlemen are here today, Al Locasal and Ron Wolf, who were with me for over 25 years, masters of detail. The indestructible Jim Otto, George Blanda, the greatest clutch player the game has ever known, Willie Brown, the magnificent cornerback, Gene Upshaw, the only player who played in the Super Bowl as a starter in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, Ted Hendricks, the consummate linebacker, Fred Blitnikoff, 14 years, and I don't have to tell you about his artistry, and of course, the magnificent Art Shell. And then you take Tom Flores, the star player who coached us for 2 Super Bowls. You throw in Al Davis, and you've had as diverse a group as you could find in this world And yet, there was a common bond. They played for the organization. They wanted to win for the organization. They loved their organization. And most of all, they loved each other. I'd like to talk to the great Raider Warriors who are here today, some 100, and some who are no longer with us, but whose memories we cherish. I say to those great Raider Warriors, let me take you back a few years to Frank Ewell Field, to the Oakland Coliseum, to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, and have you all individually introduced once again to the roar of the crowd. And we can never forget those great fans. The roar would be deafening. To see you all in those silver and black uniforms, to hear the national anthem, relive the moments of the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. To those of us who saw you battle to the top over the last 3 decades, we will never forget you. You know, Raider football was always emotional. We loved to take those memorable trips throughout the league, and we were hated, we were feared, but we were respected. Aside from my will to win, my commitment to excellence, the fire that burns brightest in me, are the great love and enthusiasm that I had and have for the game of football and for everyone and everything connected with it. I love the game, I love the league, I love my team. But more important, I wanted to embellish all of them to agree, never surpassed and seldom have ever equaled. I shall always believe that great people inspire in others the will to be great. I shall cherish this honor for the rest of my life. I thank you very much.